All right, little listeners, gather close because today's story is about a young boy named Samuel, a boy just like you, who had something very special happen to him. Samuel didn't just talk to God in his prayers. Oh no! Samuel actually heard God's voice calling him in the middle of the night. But let's start from the beginning, shall we? Long before Samuel was born, there was a woman named Hannah who wanted a child more than anything else in the world. She prayed and prayed, asking God for a baby, and she promised that if God blessed her with a son, she would dedicate him to serve God all his life. And guess what? God answered her prayer, and little Samuel was born. Hannah loved her son so much, but she kept her promise to God. When Samuel was old enough, she took him to the temple to live with the priest, Eli, so he could serve God. Now Samuel was still young, probably about your age, and he had to get used to living in the temple. There were lots of things to learn, like how to keep the lamps lit, how to help with the offerings, and how to listen and obey the old priest, Eli. Samuel was a curious and cheerful boy, and he loved helping out, even though he probably missed his mother sometimes. One quiet night, Samuel was lying in bed, cozy and ready for sleep. The temple was still, the lamps flickered gently, and all you could hear was the soft breathing of Eli, who was fast asleep in the next room. Then, out of nowhere, a voice called, "Samuel! Samuel!" Samuel's eyes popped open and he sat up in bed, wide awake. "Huh? Who said that?" He thought it was Eli calling him, so he jumped out of bed, ran to Eli's room and whispered, "Here I am! You called me." Eli opened one sleepy eye, looking a little confused. "I didn't call you, Samuel. Go back to bed." Samuel scratched his head, shrugged, and went back to his room, thinking maybe he had dreamed it. But as soon as he lay down again, the voice came again. "Samuel! Samuel!" Once more Samuel jumped out of bed and ran to Eli. "Here I am! You called me!" This time Eli opened both eyes, looking a bit grumpy but also confused. "No, Samuel, I didn't call you. Now go back to bed." Samuel went back to his room, feeling a bit puzzled. "I know I heard someone call my name," he thought. But he lay back down, pulling the blankets up, hoping for a peaceful sleep. But oh no, the voice came a third time. "Samuel! Samuel!" This time Samuel was sure he wasn't dreaming. He rushed to Eli, probably feeling a little frustrated, and said, "Here I am. You called me." Eli finally understood what was happening. With a wise smile, he said, "Samuel, go back to bed. If you hear the voice again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" Samuel's eyes widened in wonder, realizing that the voice he'd been hearing was God's voice. His heart beat with excitement as he returned to bed. Sure enough, as soon as he lay down, he heard the voice again. "Samuel! Samuel!" With a deep breath, Samuel sat up, folded his hands, and said softly, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And then God spoke to Samuel. God told him things about Israel and about Eli's family. It was a serious message, and it made Samuel feel a little nervous. But he listened carefully, knowing this was something very special. The next morning, Samuel wasn't sure if he should tell Eli what God had said. But Eli gently asked him to share, and Samuel told him everything. Eli listened quietly and nodded, understanding that God had chosen to speak to Samuel. From that day on, Samuel grew up knowing he had a special job, to be a prophet, someone who listens to God and shares his words with others. As Samuel grew older, he became known as a wise and faithful prophet. People all over Israel knew that Samuel was a man who listened to God. He wasn't just any prophet. He was one of the greatest prophets of Israel, leading the people with courage, wisdom, and kindness. And it all started that night in the temple, when a young boy learned to listen to God's voice, connecting to Jesus. Now, my dear little ones, what does Samuel's story have to do with Jesus? Just as Samuel listened to God and followed his voice, Jesus shows us how to listen to God and do his will. Jesus often prayed and spent time with God, showing us that listening to God's voice is something we can do every day. Through Samuel, we learn that God can speak to anyone, even young children, and that we are all important in his eyes. 1 Samuel 3:10. Then the Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. Remember, my little ones, that just like Samuel, you can listen to God. Sometimes we hear God in our hearts when we feel peace, love, and kindness. Other times we hear him in the wise words of people who care for us. Samuel's story teaches us to listen, to be patient, and to trust that God is always with us, speaking to us in ways we can understand. Dear God, thank you for the story of Samuel and for teaching us to listen to your voice. Help us to hear you, to follow you, and to trust you, just like Samuel did. May we have open hearts and be ready to say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Thank you for loving us and for always being with us. Amen.